My name is Iris. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the training coordinator for the Family Resource Center. We are happy to welcome back Maria Uriarte, Senior Attorney from Disability Rights California, to learn more about in-home supportive services, or IHSS. First, we just want to briefly talk about what the FRC does here in San Mateo County. We serve families who have children with disabilities or special needs between the ages 0 to 22, as well as the professionals who serve them. We are staffed by parents and siblings of children and young adults with disabilities, and we provide support, information, resources, and referrals to navigate the systems that are out there. We also offer trainings just like this one, support groups, a resource finder, and a monthly e-newsletter. I want to give a disclaimer that the Family Resource Center is not a legal firm or legal services agency, and we cannot provide any legal advice. Any information provided by the Family Resource Center should not be considered a means of taking the place of any legal advice that must be obtained through an attorney. With that, we invite you all to connect with us, and I'll go ahead and put our contact information in the chat. And I also just want to introduce our FRC team who is here with us in this training tonight. We have Gabriela Diaz Santos, FRC coordinator, and Denise Tinoco, FRC bilingual coordinator. As well, Patricia Idrugo, our FRC supervisor, will be joining us later today. Next, we just want to go over some general housekeeping items to make sure our training runs smoothly tonight. We will be recording this training for any families and providers who are not able to attend this afternoon, so we ask for your collaboration with the following guidelines. Please mute yourself when not speaking to avoid any background noise. You can have your video on or off based on your preference and comfort level, and we invite your respect throughout this training. We are offering simultaneous interpretation in Spanish today, so if you haven't already, please select the language that you would like to listen to this presentation in. You can do this in the settings bar under the globe icon, and you can select either English or Spanish. Even if you're listening in English, please select English in the settings, and this will allow you to hear the interpreters translate from Spanish to English as needed. And we'll also put these instructions in the chat for our Spanish speakers. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the training, so please save your questions for the end. You can use the chat box or raise hand feature for any questions and comments. I see Maria also put in the chat that she'll be stopping every now and then to ask if there are any questions, so we'll make sure to pause the recording when we do that. We encourage you to refrain from sharing any names or detailed information to protect your and other families' privacy. And after you ask a question, please be mindful of making some pauses to allow our interpreters enough time to translate both the question and the answer. At the end of the training, we will be distributing a survey, both in English and in Spanish, to collect your feedback on how our training went. It will be anonymous, and it helps us better understand how to improve our trainings for you all. And last, we will be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with the materials from this training. Okay, thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Disability Rights California. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Iris and the team. Truly appreciate you joining us for this evening's training or afternoon. But for those who don't know us, let me just introduce our team. We have Maria Uriarte, our senior attorney, who'll be presenting for you today. I have Raymond and myself, Lonnie, who will be supporting her on the back end. But for those who don't know about Disability Rights California, we were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy Incorporated. We are a nonprofit organization founded in 1978. We are federally mandated to provide legal services for people with disabilities. Some of the issues we work on can be anything from special education, public benefit, regional center services, housing, employment, and so forth. Our offices are located in Sacramento, Los Angeles, Bay Area, and San Diego. We also have smaller offices in the Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. So if you decide you want to ask your questions and place it on the chat, we just ask you to put your question in a general format. We will allow you to unmute and ask your question. But I think that's it for now. So thank you, everyone. And I'll turn it over to Maria. Have a wonderful training.
Thank you, Lonnie. Hi, everyone. So lots of information you're going to get today. Don't feel bad if you can't retain all of the information, because you will be getting this manual that you could review later on. You can always call us too. We have an intake line that we're going to put in chat that you can call to talk about IHSS or any other of the subjects we deal with, like regional centers, Department of Rehab, mental health rights, benefits, Medi-Cal, etc. So we're going to talk about applying for IHSS, what IHSS is, how do you qualify for IHSS. We're going to talk about the self-assessment, which is really important when you're going to have that first assessment, and the social worker is going to come out and determine what services you should get and how much time you should get. In that self-assessment, we're going to review the services that are offered by IHSS. And then we're going to delve a little deeper into some of the services like protected supervision, paramedical services, transportation. Then we're done with services, and then we'll move into how are the hours calculated? Like, how does the social worker come up with the hours that I'm going to get? But to understand that, you also have to understand some of the tools that they use. So we're going to talk about the functional index rankings, the one that is used for children. We're going to show you the regulations that pertain to when a parent can be a provider of a minor child, or when someone else can be a provider of a minor child and not the parent. We're going to talk about the notice of action and how to appeal if you're not happy. I'm not going to go through representing yourself at state hearing. It's just a document that was put together by, I think, Legal Aid of LA, and you can read it. I do another training on appeals, so there's so much information that I have to share with you today that's like the least important at this moment. So in order for you to apply for in-home supported services, you have to have Medi-Cal. If you do not have Medi-Cal, you cannot apply for in-home supported services. And in California, there are many, many, many Medi-Cal programs. Each Medi-Cal program has its own qualifying criteria. But so it's having Medi-Cal that's going to trigger your ability to apply for IHSS. And what do? You call your local county welfare office, or they call it the Department of Public Social Services in your county. And one of the things that they're going to ask you, the doctor, to do is to fill out what is called the health care certification form. So a doctor has to fill this out, and it tells you right here what types of doctors they will allow to have this form filled out. The doctor has to answer these questions. Is this individual unable to independently perform one or more activities of daily living? Yes, no. In your opinion, is one or more of IHSS services recommended to prevent out-of-home care? Because the reason behind the IHSS program is to provide services and supports in the home, so people do not have to go into an institution, to keep them safe in the home. And so these questions go towards that. And nothing will happen until, you're not going to be approved for hours until this form is filled out and sent to the county. All the forms for IHSS have numbers, and this is the SOC 873, last updated in October of 2016. So this is what the SOC 873 looks like. So, after you apply, a social worker is going to come to the home to do an assessment, to assess your needs for services and the time you need for the services. If the social worker asks you, well, what is it that you need? And you don't know what the program offers, well, that's not going to be really good, right? You may not get everything that you need. So it's really important for you to know what services the program offers so that you can ask for what you need and explain why you need help with the service, how much time you need, usually by week for the service, and why you need that time. If it's more than what's reasonable, you have to ask, you're going to have to explain why you need the time that you need. So the services are divided into topics. So we have domestic services, and this is a self-assessment that we have on our website. I actually do a training on how to prepare a self-assessment, and the self-assessment that we use in that training is different than this one. But this gives you a good idea of the services that are available. So under domestic services, we have sweeping, vacuuming, cleaning the oven, defrosting the refrigerator, storing food, taking out the garbage, changing bed linens, etc. If you look at the manual of policy and procedures, which are the regulations for this program or the rules for this program, all of these services are defined, and there's much more in the regulations than what is listed here as far as domestic services. Now, you'll note that here it says that children are not eligible to receive domestic services. If you're the parent provider of a minor child, the child will not get domestic services. And it says here it's usually limited to 6 hours per month. You can ask for more if you have an exception to that limitation. And I'm going to talk more about that later. So wherever you see time limits in this assessment, they're only guidelines. And if you need more time, you can have more time, but you have to explain why you need an exception to the time, right? The next category of services are related services, which include preparing meals, meal cleanup, laundry, shopping for other errands, etc. For meal prep and meal cleanup, you're going to have to talk about breakfast, lunch, and dinner if that's what you need help with. And what about snacks? This form doesn't include snacks, but you know, if you're a person who eats snacks regularly every day, then those little minutes add up. And then we have another category of non-medical personal services, personal care services, which includes respiration care, bowel and bladder, feeding, drinking, bed baths, dressing, menstrual care, ambulation, moving in and out of the bed, grooming, and helping with wheelchair, medication management, help with prostheses. This is a big category of services. The next category, so you saw here that's heavy cleaning. Heavy cleaning is only in very limited circumstances. You're not going to get a provider to come and do, you know, your spring cleaning every spring or every 6 months. It's when, like, your landlord is telling you, hey, you know, you have such a mess that if you don't clean this up, I'm going to have to do something. There's something called yard hazard abatement, which is the same concept. And you would need to ask the social worker for additional hours for those category of services. And then we have transportation, which I'm going to talk about, to medical appointments. There's that yard hazard abatement, protective supervision, which is the only service in IHSS that actually pays a provider to watch you. And I'm going to talk about the criteria for protective supervision. Paramedical services, I'm also going to talk about paramedical services. So these are the services that are offered under the IHSS program. And you can become familiar with them. You can go, you know, and look at the regulations to know more about each service, what's included in each service. And the regulations are found, I think I may have them here. If I don't, they're found in the California Department of Social Services website. And we can send that to your leader, your group leader, along with the materials. So Lonnie, let's just put that down as something we need to do if it's not here. So let's talk about protective supervision. You see ACL 15-25, that's an all-county letter. So when the California Department of Social Services wants to send information to the counties, they could do it by way of an all-county letter. And this all-county letter actually talks about protective supervision. It's a focus on minors. So when we talk about minors, we're talking about anyone under the age of 18. But you could be any age, and if you qualify for protective supervision, you'll get it. So, excuse me, I got something here. So, so what this gives a lot of information, excuse me, on protective supervision. It tells you where you could find information in the regulations here, MPP sections 30-757.17 through 0.172, but it tells you that information here too. If you are getting protective supervision or you want to get protective supervision, you should be reading this document. And so there's criteria for getting protective supervision. And the criteria that you're going to find in this document, it's back here in page 6 and 7, is that you have to establish that you have a mental disability. It could be developmental, it could be a mental health disability, it could be traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever your mental disability is, that makes you non-self-directing. And what does that mean? It means that because of your mental disability, you do not understand that the behavior you're doing or about to do is going to cause you injury. Protective supervision is not about protecting other people. If you have aggressive behaviors towards others or towards property, you're not going to get protective supervision. You have to have a mental disability that makes you non-self-directing, and you need it to protect you. You have to also be able to engage in dangerous, have the physical capacity to engage in dangerous activities. You have to need more supervision when we're talking about kids. It's not important for adults, but for anyone under the age of 18, you have to show that this minor of that age with a disability needs more supervision than a minor of the same age without a disability. That to me is really easy, because when you start talking about behaviors and you compare the behaviors of a 12-year-old with a disability with no behaviors from a 12-year-old without a disability, then yes, you can, that's easy to establish. And for both adults and minors, you have to show that the person needs 24/7 supervision to be on the program. So really important to know the criteria. And there are forms that the county is going to ask you to fill out. Actually, a doctor is going to fill out the SOC 821, and then you would be filling out the SOC 825. So the SOC 821, remember the form numbers are always here in the left corner of the document, is for some doctor who is familiar with your memory orientation and judgment to talk about it. Does this person have any deficit in memory? Is it moderate or intermittent, or is it severe memory deficit? And the doctor will check off, and that form will get into the hands of the county. Now, this form is not dispositive of your need for protective supervision. It's just a piece of paper that the county will consider when deciding whether to give you protective supervision, along with all the other information that the county has gathered. It could be that the county is looking at medical records, IPPs from the regional center, IEPs from the school district, to determine the need for protective supervision. Filling out this form used to be dispositive of the need for protective supervision, but it's not anymore. So it's just something that the social worker is going to look at. And by the way, if you don't get this form to the county, the social worker will look at everything else that he or she has to determine the need for protective supervision. The other form that the county will need to have filled out is called the 24-hour-a-day coverage plan. So remember, in order to get protective supervision, you have to establish that you need 24/7 supervision. So the program doesn't pay for 24/7 supervision, but you still have to show how this person is going to be supervised 24 hours a day. So this is the plan that you would put together. He's supervised, during the school, during Monday through Friday at school. And the IEP should reflect that he's being supervised to prevent self-injury, right? Because if the child is being supervised at school if he has a one-to-one to help with homework, take him to the bathroom, that's not the kind of supervision that this program is requiring. But if the child elopes from school, bangs his head on the desk and won't stop, self-mutilates at school, those are the kinds of behaviors that the program is looking for. Those are just examples. It's not the only thing. They're not the only behaviors. And there are instructions on how to fill out the form. Paramedical services we have a really great publication on paramedical services. They're skill tasks that are necessary to maintain your health as an IHSS recipient that you can't perform at home, that need to be done. So, some of the tasks that are paramedical in nature is if someone has to give you medication, either in the mouth or by tube, anything that involves puncturing the skin, inserting a device into any body opening, activities requiring sterile procedures, or other activities requiring training given by a licensed health professional. So, for example, range of motion exercises that you can't do at home and you need a provider to help you do that. And so there's a lot of really good information and examples, injections, nasal gastric tube, G-tube feeding, tracheostomy care and suctioning, skin and wound care for ulcers, catheter insertion, different colostomy and ostomy irrigation, digital stimulation, I mentioned range of motion exercises, some that can be paramedical. This is not a complete list of what could be paramedical services. And so how do you determine whether what you want is a paramedical service? And it tells you, is it a service ordered by a licensed health professional? Is the paramedical task something you would do for yourself, if not for your functional limitations? Is this task necessary to maintain health because of a physical or mental condition? Does the task involve any of those things I mentioned before, right? Administering medications in the mouth or via tube, puncturing the skin. This is the definition of a paramedical service. Sometimes some services can either be personal care services, and sometimes they could be considered paramedical services. So, for example, help with self-administration of medications. If all you have to do is, sort out the medications for the person or put the medication on the table so that the person can take it, that's going to be under personal care, right? But if you're having to crush them and put them in food or put them via tube or some other form, that's now paramedical in nature. So range of motion, so this document tells you when range of motion can be considered personal care versus when range of motion can be considered a paramedical service. Rubbing and repositioning skin, respiration, finger and toenail care. Anyway, it's for you to look at, but most important is the form that is required to be filled out by a doctor, and it's called the SOC 321. Remember, the form number is always at the bottom here. So this is a form that a doctor will fill out, and the first part is who this doctor is, and the second part is, what is the paramedical service that you're asking for? How much time is required to perform the service each time it's performed? The frequency. How many times a day or how many times a week? And for how long is the service going to be necessary? Is it going to be indefinite, or is it only for the next 6 months? And the doctor can put additional comments here. Now, unlike the form for protective supervision, what the doctor puts here is it is dispositive of what you get. And of course, you have to always worry about what the maximum number of hours that you can get under the program, right? Because there is a ceiling on that. And so as long as you don't reach the ceiling, so if the doctor says that I need range of motion exercises 3 times a day, every time it's done, it's for a period of 20 minutes, and this is going to be indefinite, that is something that should be given to me. Now, I've heard of social workers reaching out to doctors to question the paramedical form. You just need to let your doctor know that, hey, you know what, they could call you, but you need to stick to your guns. And by the way, when you're asking a health professional or anyone to fill out a form, you need to educate them about what you're doing. So if you want a doctor to fill out the SOC 821 for protective supervision, give them information on what protective supervision means, because the doctor may have a very different definition of what protective supervision means. If you're wanting a doctor to fill out a paramedical form, give them our publication so that the doctor understands what it means what the definition of a paramedical service is, right? So that the doctor can properly fill out the form. So this is a really important form to fill out. The next area that I'm going to talk about is transportation to and from medical appointments. So in order to get transportation to and from medical appointments, you have to show that the provider is necessary for you while you're going to the doctor, for example. It could be that the provider needs to help you get in and out of the car, is performing some IHSS service. And I'm going to talk about transportation and children in a moment. So starting in February of 2016, the law changed, and it now allowed for providers to be paid for wait time at the doctor's appointment. But in order to get wait time, you have to show that the provider can't leave, because you can't predict how long the person is going to be at the appointment, right? So that's called wait time on duty. The program used to not pay for wait time, but as of 2016, it does pay for wait time. Now, I don't know if social workers are telling people or asking questions about, hey, are you having to wait, and how long are you waiting? I doubt it, but you now know that you can ask for wait time if you qualify under the wait time on duty. The other off duty would be, let's say you have an MRI appointment, you're being told that you have to be there by 11 and you can be picked up by 12. Well, the provider's not going to be paid for wait time, because we know when the appointment is going to end, and therefore you're on wait. The provider is wait time off duty, not going to get paid for that. Now, for children, it's really important to understand when the program is looking at whether to give a child hours, a minor, the program will always compare a child of that particular age with a child of the same age without a disability. So a child without a disability, parents will be usually the ones who take the child to the pediatrician, to the dentist, to the vision doctor. There's nothing extraordinary about that. Those are not children, hopefully, are getting these types of services. And that's something that a parent is expected to do. So with IHSS, the program will not pay a parent just to take your child to the pediatrician, to the dentist, to appointments that a typical child would go to anyway, right? But it will pay for transportation if you have to take your child to a specialist because of the child's disability. The child has to go to a speech therapist, a physical therapist, a specialist. Those are all appointments that the program will pay a parent to do, right? Because it's a typical child is not having to go to a physical therapist, a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, some other specialist. It's because of the child's disability that that has to happen. And the program will also pay for wait time for the parent. So it's really important to know that. And you'll have that publication. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions about what I just discussed. Okay, so we are going to now talk about how hours are calculated. And I think we need to start from the beginning. This is the publication that we put together. And we need to understand that IHSS, you need to think about IHSS as this umbrella. And under this umbrella, there are 4 funding streams, 4 programs. The Personal Care Services Program, the Independence Plus Option Program, the Residual Program, and the Community First Choice Option Program. Depending on what program they put you in will depend how many hours maximum you can get in IHSS. Not everyone gets the most, anyone, you know, the most hours you could get in the program is 283. You can't get more than that. But some people get less than that. The max is less than that because they've been placed on particular programs. When you get your notice of action for the first time, it'll say, you're going to be placed on the PCSP program, and these are the hours. And no one ever pays attention to that part of it because they're really interested in what hours they're going to get, right? But sometimes it matters what program they put you on. So it is important to know this information. I'm going to first give you a brief description of each program, and then we're going to come to this chart. So the PCSP program are people who are getting Medi-Cal, and the provider is not a parent provider or a spouse provider. The IPO is when you have a provider who's going to be a parent of a minor child, of course, or your spouse. Or you as the IHSS recipient receive advance pay. There are 2 ways to pay a provider. One, the provider submits timesheets, and down the line, the provider gets paid. The second way, the provider will submit timesheets, but the program is sending the recipient money in advance so that the recipient can make out a check to the provider on the pay period, on the day that people get paid. So the provider doesn't have to wait to get paid. Why? Because people who are on advance pay are considered severely disabled. And there's a definition of severely disabled that I'm going to show you. So that's advance pay. You can forego some of the services like meal prep, for example, if you want and receive a restaurant allowance instead of the hours for the service. And the 20 some odd years I've been doing this work, I've never seen that happen. And I think I looked at the restaurant meal allowance, and I think it was like $60 a month that they would give you in lieu of giving you the service. So there's obviously more information on all of this, but that's the IPO program. The residual program is because it's the only program where the federal government is not paying, helping to pay for IHSS, or you're not getting full scope Medi-Cal with federal financial participation. That's what it's called when the federal government is helping to pay. It's usually for people because they're in an immigration status that doesn't allow them to receive benefits where the federal government is helping to pay. So for example, lawful permanent residents for the first 5 years, for example, can't apply for SSI because that's the rule. And so those people who are in that status can apply for something called CAPI, Cash Assistance Program for Immigrants in California. It's a state program. Federal government's not paying for it, the state of California. So if you're in that kind of where you've got your immigration status would fit into the residual program, then that's where you're going to be placed. The Community First Option Program is a program where if you were not living at home, you would meet the criteria to enter a nursing facility, and there are different levels of care. Nursing facilities have different levels of care. And so it doesn't require you to go to the nursing facility. It just requires you to meet the criteria. That's the CFCO program. There's more information on each program in this last column. You see all county information notice, all county letter. These are all letters that the California Department of Social Services sends out to the counties, and each of these will explain each program. So why does it matter? And this document also, it describes what is severely impaired. So severely impaired under the program is for people who have 20 or more hours a week in the following categories, combinations thereof, doesn't matter: meal prep, meal cleanup, all of the personal care services, and or paramedical services. You're severely impaired if you need 20 or more hours in these services. It could be all paramedical services. It could be all, and none of the other services that are listed here, or it could be all personal care or a combination thereof. It doesn't matter as long as you have 20 hours or more. So when we come to this chart, let's say that I'm placed on the PCSP program and I'm not severely impaired. And let's say that I need protective supervision. By the way, for protective supervision, there are only 1 of 2 hours that you're going to get. 195 if you're non-severely impaired, or 283 if you're severely impaired. So I'm on the PCSP program. I need protective supervision. I'm not severely impaired. And I need about 50 hours in personal care services, accompaniment to doctor appointments, and other services, totaling 50 hours. So I am going to get 195 hours of protective supervision, and I'm going to get those additional 50 hours. My max is 283. So I could get all of those hours under the PCSP program. Same thing for the CFCO program. It works the same way. But if I'm placed in the IPO program and I'm non-severely impaired and I need protective supervision and I also need those 50 extra hours in other services, I'm not going to get those 50 extra hours in the other services. The maximum I'm going to get is 195 if I'm not severely impaired. Same for the residual program. So what I say to people, if they're placed in the IPO, look to see if maybe you would qualify for the CFCO. So your maximum is 283 rather than 195. For people in the residual program, I've seen this recently. A client got a notice saying that he was being transferred from the CFCO program to the residual, but he's a US citizen. So it was like, this is not, shouldn't be happening, but it did. So it's a lot harder when you're placed in the residual program because your immigration status may be such that you're going to be in the residual program. So what I say to people is try to increase the hours that would make you severely impaired. So you move from 195 ceiling to 283. So what will affect your hours? Of course, the ceiling that you're going to have, and it'll be based on what program they put you on. If you don't know what program you're on, you can always ask the social worker or look at the last notice, because if you're moved from one program to the other, you're also going to get a notice of action. The other thing too is what is going to affect your hours too. So we've talked about the program that you're going to be put on. Secondly, proration. So for categories of domestic, heavy cleaning, and related services, if there are other people in the home who are benefiting from what the provider is doing for you, then your hours are going to be prorated. So let's say, for example, I live with a roommate and my provider makes my meals, and my roommate, who is not on the program, eats the same meals that the provider makes. Well, the program's not going to pay for the provider to make meals for my roommate who's not on the program. So what the program is going to do is they're going to establish my total need for food, for meal prep, say, for example, and they're going to divide that by the number of people who are benefiting from that meal, which would be my roommate. And so my hours are going to cut, the hours they're going to give me for meal prep are going to be cut in half because of proration. The other thing that will reduce your hours are alternative resources. So if I'm someone who, if I'm receiving IHSS-like services through other programs, like a day program, through school, through adult day care program, or a day program through the regional center, though my hours for that service are going to be reduced. So let's talk about meal prep. Let's say that I get 10 hours of meal prep a week, but I go to this program where they provide me with breakfast and lunch 3 days a week. Well, that time is going to be deducted from my 10 hours a week of meal prep because I'm getting the service, part of the service that I need that week from another program. So alternative resources will reduce the amount of time that you get for some services, right? Lots more information here for you to look at. So now that we understand the kinds of things that could reduce your hours, let's look at some of the tools that the social workers use to determine the hours, right? So once the social worker is ready to decide what services to give you and how much to give you, for every service that you ask, the social worker will rank it. So the rankings are here. 1 is you're independent. You're not going to get any time for that service. 2 is the only rank where the provider can get paid to provide verbal assistance or guiding or encouragement. So if I'm someone who I can do the task, but I need to be reminded to do it, like to take my medications, to eat, to take a shower, for those services, I would be ranked a 2. 3, I can do the service, but I need some physical assistance from the provider. 4, I can do the service, but I need substantial human assistance from the provider. 5, I can't do it. I need total human assistance from the provider. And 6 is for paramedical services. These rankings will be used when we talk about kids too. So these rankings are for kids and adults, minors and adults. But let's talk about minors, because when we're talking about minors, you really have to start here with this document. You'll see that the first column is age 0 through 17, and then we've got a lot of 1s under house, well, for all the ages, 1s. In laundry, you have a 1 from age 0 to 1 to about a 13, and then you have other options at age 14. You have a 1, 4, or 5. So you see that for these services, there are functional index rankings that are allowed, right? And so what's important about this document is to read the first 2 notes. Under notes, it says all minors should be assessed a functional index ranking of 1 when identified above, unless there's an extraordinary need that's documented. And it also says that minors who live with their parent providers will be assessed a functional index ranking of 1 in housework. Doesn't matter the extraordinary need. So if you're a parent provider of a minor child, you'll see there's a 1 all along in this column under housework. And your child is not going to get any time for domestic services. But for any of these other services where you see a 1, I'm going to give you the service your child the service unless you can establish an extraordinary need. There again, you compare your child of a particular age with a disability, and you compare your child with a child of the same age without a disability. So let's talk about a 12-year-old who is with a disability who needs help with feeding, right? And if you look at age 12 and you look at feeding, they can use functional index rankings from 1 to 6, 6 being paramedical. Okay, so if I say that my child needs prompting to eat, the child can actually do it, but needs prompting to eat because won't eat if not prompted. So that would be a functional index ranking of 2, right? But if it were, you know, so you could do that. Let's compare that with, for example, laundry. Where you see a 1 for a 12-year-old. That means where you see a 1 for a minor, it means, I know it means independent in the functional index world, but where you see a 1 in this chart, it means they're not going to give it to your child unless there's an extraordinary need. So I had a case where the father testified at a hearing. I go to the laundromat 3 times. The first time, it's to do my laundry and my child's laundry. The next 2 times is to do my child's laundry and linens. Because of his disability, he soils, he puts his hand in his diaper and smears feces all over him. Those are the 2 extra times. The judge said in his decision, the time that the father goes and does his laundry and the child's laundry, that's what a parent would do. There's nothing extraordinary about that. But the 2 additional times, the parent has to go and do the laundry because of the child's disabilities. That's extraordinary because the parent wouldn't have to go 2 extra times for a typical child, because a typical child would not be wetting his clothes, you know, smearing, is not wearing diapers, it wouldn't be doing the kinds of things that this 12-year-old with a disability is doing. So you have to show above and beyond what you would normally do for a typical child. That's extraordinary. So when people say to me, well, can my 4-year-old get services? I say, you need to look at this chart and look at 4 years old and look to see what services you're thinking you need and look to see what functional index ranking is there. And if there's a 1, you're going to have to show an extraordinary need. If there are other functional index rankings above a 1, you don't have to show extraordinary need. You just have to talk about why you're choosing the functional index ranking that you're choosing, right? So this is extremely important, this chart, because social workers use it, judges use it. Sometimes you'll hear the social workers say, well, it's a parent's responsibility to do this. What I think they're saying is they know that the functional index ranking chart says a 1 for that service for that age, but what they're not telling you is, or exploring with you is there an extraordinary need beyond what a typical child would get from the parent? That's really the question to be asking. And I don't know if that really happens a lot. So that's the functional index ranking chart for kids. So now what does the county do with these functional index rankings for each service that you've asked for? They use the hourly task guidelines. So let's say that I in my self-assessment, the social worker and I were talking about meal prep. I said, look, because of my functional limitations with my hands and my wrists and my disabilities, and I go at length to describe and show her documentation about my disability and my limitations, I say to her, I need 10 hours of meal prep a week. I get a notice of action that says 7 hours a week for meal prep. I call her and I say, why did you give me 7 when I talked to you about the need for 10? And she said, well, Maria, that's the most I can give you. What she's really saying is that the hourly task guidelines say that and let's say that she ranked me a 5, right? Because I'm severe. I can't do it. I need help. And I've convinced her based on everything I've said and given her that I really can't prepare my meals. So if you look at meal prep in blue, the first column, and you go all the way to rank number 5, it's in purple, you see there's a 7 hours a week, low, mid 7 hours, and high 7 hours. So what she's essentially saying to me is, I can only give you the max of 7 per the hourly task guidelines. But what she hasn't told me is the full story. The full story is that if there's an exception to the guideline, I can get more hours. I could get my 10 hours if I can, she's not giving them to me. Or she may say, or the most likely scenario is she's going to say, well, Maria, if you're not happy with it, you can go to hearing. Maybe she'll say, oh, you know what, let me reconsider and let me just look into it and I'll let you know. Maybe. So what you need to know about these hourly task guidelines is that they're guidelines. And if you have an exception for more time, they can give you more time. They can even give you less than the low end of the rank. So here we have 7 hours. If my meal prep consists of toast and coffee in the morning, and they heat up frozen dinners for lunch and dinner, I don't have snacks, the meal prep time is going to be a lot less than 7 hours a week. And because, by the way, you can't count the time that the meal is actually cooking in the stove, in the microwave, in the oven, because you don't need a provider to be watching the food, right? You just put it to cook and they expect the provider to be doing other things. So yes, even rank 5, where it says low 7 hours, it's based on the information I give the social worker about my meal preps and what I eat and all of that, I may get less than the low. So the next time, because I've taken this training and the social worker says to me, oh, Maria, it's the most I can give you, I'm going to say, I know that you're referring to the guidelines, but you know, and I know that if there's an exception, I can get more time. And I've talked to you about it, and you can talk to the social worker about your exception. To hit the point home, I want to talk about a case I did a long time ago where my client needed a lot of hours in domestic services. And you see here it says that it's 6 hours maximum per month. It's a guideline. But if there's an exception, I can get more time. And so I had a conversation with the social worker. She said, you don't like it? Go to hearing. We went to hearing. My client testified as to why he needed the hours that he needed in domestic services, submitted documentation from the doctor, etc. The judge awarded him more than 30 hours in domestic services. So yes, it can be done. And these are only guidelines. So really important to know this. There's also something that we use, which is called the Vineland Maturity Scale. That document that's prepared, it was prepared by CDSS, California Department of Social Services, and I think Sacramento State College. Anyway, it shows at what age a typical child can do the IHSS task, like at what age can the child, feed himself. A typical child, because, you may not know when a typical child can, the developmental milestones for a child in those categories of services. So that document will show you so that you can argue that, hey, wait a minute, an 8-year-old can already use can use a knife to cut. My 8-year-old can't, So we use it when we're preparing for assessments, and we also use it, we go to hearing to give the judge an idea of why this child is not at the point that a typical child of the same age is with regard to the IHSS services. So we're going to give you the link so that you can look at it and use it. And so I'm going to stop here because the next section we're going to talk about is parent providers. I'm going to actually show you the regulations for parent providers of minor kids and when a non-parent can be a provider of a child. So we're going to sort of switch topics, and we're going to stop right now to see if there are any questions about the tools I've just gone through. Okay, so we get questions a lot about, oh, can I be the parent provider of my child? So these are the regulations. Remember the rules. I talked to you about the IHSS program. their manual of policy and procedures. This is section 30-763.44. This is the rules of when someone who is not the parent with the legal duty to take care of the child can be an IHSS provider, and it's only when the parent is not able or available. What does that mean? It's only when the parent is unavailable because the parent is working, enrolled in school or a vocational program, or is going to medical appointments, health-related appointments, or when the parent can't physically or mentally provide the IHSS services that are needed. They give some time also for the parent to have a provider, so the parent can go do some shopping for the family and that kind of thing. So essentially, you can have a non-parent come and provide IHSS for your child while you are not available because of these reasons, or you're not able to because of a mental or physical disability. Now, if you want to be the parent provider of your minor child, then you have to show, this is really important, it's point 451. The parent has left full-time employment or is prevented from obtaining full-time employment because there's no other suitable provider available, and the parent needs to be there to take care of the child. When you're talking about a one-parent household, so those are easier cases than when there's a two-parent household. If there's a second parent in the house, that parent is considered to be able and available, and therefore the other parent can't be the provider. So there are all these rules, and working full-time means an average of 40 or more hours a week. There are going to be some major changes to these regulations, hopefully in the near future, which will be beneficial to everyone. So we're just waiting for that to happen. But in the meantime, these are the regulations that govern when a non-parent provider can be a provider of a minor child, or when the parent can be a provider of the minor child. There's an all-county letter, and Lonnie, I don't know if you have access to it, that goes in a lot of detail about parent providers and non-parent providers. We can provide it to your group also so that you have it. So these are the regulations. Let's look at the notice of action that you get from the county. The top right-hand part of the notice will have the date of the notice, information about the case and the worker, etc. And then you see here, the first rectangle says as of, let's say that the date of the notice is August 1st of this year. And it says as of September 1st, your services will change in this way. This is called the effective date of the notice, the as of notice, because as of September 1st, we're going to terminate your IHSS, right? Why is this important? Because if you don't want that to happen on September 1st, you have to appeal before September 1st, before the effective date of the notice. Because typically you would have 90 days to appeal a notice of action from IHSS, but if you want the services not to change on September 1st, you have to appeal before the effective date, before September 1st, and ask for aid paid pending. And the back of the notice will tell you this. And so when you're looking at the notice, you've got services in the first column, the total amount of need of service needed. So let's say that I need 10 hours of my total need for prepping meals is 10 hours. Then the third column is where there's going to be any proration. And you see that there's proration for domestic services and related services, but there isn't any. The rest of this is gray. You can't have proration for, any of these services here. And then the next column is the difference between the second column and the third column. And then the next column is services you refused or you get from others. Those were alternative resources. So if my total need here in the second column is 10 hours, and I go to a day program 3 times a week, they give me breakfast and dinner, and they reduced my hour, they reduce, me, you know, for alternative resources, they reduce my time by an hour and a half, then it'll be reflected in this column. And then the last big column is divided into three. The now is what this notice of action is doing. The was is what your last notice of action gave you for those services and whether that's an increase or decrease. So this is a typical notice of action from IHSS. Yeah. So representing yourself at a state hearing, you could read this. I'm not going to go over it. I think we can use our time best to answer questions. Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, everyone, for helping me. Thank you for inviting us. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
both
you,
for
Raymond.
your training tonight. We appreciate you spending your afternoon with us and engaging in our training. A big thank you to Maria for this very informative training and for answering questions. And thank you to the Disability Rights California team for their work on the back end. As well as thank you to our interpreters for their hard work this afternoon. As a reminder, we will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow with the presentation and all the links that we shared in the chat.